Hello, this is the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Thank you so much for tuning into this video in which we will review probability and go through relative frequency. So probability is just the assigning to random events a number between 0 and 1 to indicate how likely the event is to occur. So when you're asked what is the probability of an event, you need to give a number between 0 and 1. Obviously, 0 means the event is impossible, 1 means it's certain. Events with probability close to 1 are likely, probability close to 0 are unlikely. But make sure if you ask the probability, you always give a number and that number is between 0 and 1. So when we're looking at probability, we're only really interested in random events, that is, events whose outcome is determined at least partly by chance. Now, probabilities always add to 1. That is, if you take all the possible outcomes of an event and add up their probabilities, you always get 1, just like percentages always add to 100%. So how do we actually calculate the probability of an event? Well, we're going to use this formula here. This says the probability of an event, that's what PR means, probability of an event, is the number of ways the event can occur over the total number of outcomes. NS here means the number in the sample space. So you use this formula when all outcomes are equally likely. So let's look at an example. Let's say a normal 6-sided die is rolled. So the sample space, which is a set, so I'm going to use these weird brackets here, the sample space is 1 to 6. The sample space is just the set of all possible outcomes. So there are 6 possible outcomes, so NS, number in the sample space, is 6. So the probability that you roll an odd number, well, there are 1, 2, 3 ways that can occur. The number of ways that an odd number can be rolled is 3. So the probability you roll an odd number of ways it can occur over total number of outcomes. Now, when you're writing probabilities, doesn't matter if you give a fraction or a decimal, but if giving a fraction, make sure it's simplified. So the answer to this is half or 0.5. So what does this here mean? This means the probability of not getting a 5. That's what that dash means. So as we said before, probabilities add to 1. If the probability of getting a 5 is 1 out of 6, because there's 1 5 on the die, the probability of not getting a 5 will be 5 over 6. The probability an event does happen is just 1 minus the event that it doesn't happen. So the probability of not getting a 5 is 5 over 6. That makes sense because there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ways you can roll a number that's not 5, and there are 6 outcomes in total. So these events are called complementary events. An event and the opposite of that event are complementary. Rolling a 5 and not rolling a 5 are complementary events. So what's the probability I roll a number that's an odd and not a 5? Well, let's go through and find out how many ways that can occur. So odd numbers are 1, 3, 5, but I don't want to get a 5. So that only leaves me with 1 and 3. There are 2 ways this can occur out of 6 outcomes in total. Once again, I've got to make sure the fraction's simplified. It's so much easier to write a fraction here because 1 over 3 is 0.3 recurring, so I'll just leave it at that. Now, what's the probability I roll a number that's odd or not a 5? So let's go through and find out which of these events satisfy that. So 1 is odd, so I include that. 2 is not a 5. 3 is odd, so I include that. 4 is not a 5, so I include that. 5, I actually include that because 5 is odd. It's in this part of it. And 6 is also not a 5. So in fact, all 6 of these are either odd or not a 5. So that means the probability of that occurring is 1. This event is certain to occur. All right, let's now look at relative frequency. So relative frequency is just the fraction or proportion of times something happens or something is. Let's look at an example. So everyone at a school with 800 students has either red, blonde, brown, or black hair. So let's put this in a table. So here we have some relative frequencies. This means, as you'd expect, 1 over 16, 1/16 of students have red hair, 2/5 of students have blonde hair, and 1/4 have brown hair. So what would be the relative frequency of a student with black hair. Well, just like probabilities, relative frequencies here need to add up to 1. So the number that goes in here, I just take 1 and I subtract all of these relative frequencies. So you can use your calculator for this and you get 23 over 80. 23 80ths of students have black hair. So how many students would have each of these colours? Well, there's 800 students. What we're going to use here is this rule here. The expected number of times we expect something to occur is just the probability or relative frequency times the number of trials. Number of trials means number of times you do something. In this case, we're picking 800 students. So there's like 800 trials. So the number that have red hair would just be 1 over 16 times 800, which is 50. There would be 50 students with red hair. Similarly for blonde hair, 2/5 times 800 gives us 320. And so on for brown and black hair. Note that all of these numbers here add up to 800. So just make sure you understand relative frequency and probability are pretty much the same thing. When we say the relative frequency of a student with red hair is 1 over 16, we basically mean if you were to pick a student at random, the probability that they would have red hair is 1 over 16. So what probabilities and relative frequencies mean? They're just the proportion of times we expect something to happen. If an event has probability 2 over 5, that means we expect that it will happen 2/5 of the time. Or every 5 trials we have, we expect it to happen twice. All right, thank you so much for tuning into this video. This has been the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Have a great day.